Sharks are often misunderstood as creatures that randomly attack humans. But what many don't realize is how specific triggers can lead to these terrifying encounters. Species like the bull shark are known for their adaptability to salt and fresh water, increasing their reach into areas humans frequent. Meanwhile, the tiger shark's opportunistic nature makes it one of the most aggressive predators, attacking anything in its path. Smaller sharks, like the reef shark, can be deadly when threatened. These 6 harrowing encounters show just how dangerous these misunderstood predators can be. The Gold Coast in Australia, known for its beautiful beaches and calm waters, was the perfect place for the McAllister family to celebrate their youngest son's birthday. It was January 17, 1995, a bright summer day, and the family had been looking forward to this day for months. The McAllisters, James, 42, his wife Sarah, 39, and their 3 children, Liam, 16, Megan, 14, and Oliver, who had just turned 9, had rented a small boat for the occasion. They planned to spend the day on the water, swimming, fishing, and relaxing. They had done this before, and the waters of the Gold Coast had always been a source of happiness and tranquility. The boat was small but perfect for a family outing. It had a small cabin and plenty of space to store their fishing gear and picnic supplies. The day had been filled with laughter as they sailed a few miles offshore, still within sight of the coast. Oliver, excited for his birthday, had caught his first fish, and the family had spent hours enjoying the sun and sea breeze. By mid-afternoon, they anchored the boat in a seemingly calm, shallow area to swim quickly before heading back to shore. The waters around Australia, particularly the Gold Coast, were known for great white sharks. These massive predators could reach up to 20 feet in length and were apex hunters, capable of sensing the slightest movement in the water from miles away. While attacks were rare, locals knew the risks, but the McAllisters, like many tourists, weren't overly concerned. The sun was bright, the sea was clear, and the water looked inviting. James had checked the depth and felt confident they were in safe territory. The family gathered on the deck, their voices rising excitedly as they prepared for one last swim before heading home. Liam and Megan were the first to dive into the water, splashing each other and laughing as Oliver waited for his dad to help him into the water. Watching from the boat, Sarah smiled at her children, content in the day's joy. Unbeknownst to them, far below the surface, a great white shark was prowling the waters, drawn by the vibrations of the family's playful splashing. It had been hunting along the coast, and now, sensing potential prey, it moved swiftly, its powerful body cutting through the depths. The shark was massive, nearly 18 feet long, with rows of razor-sharp teeth designed for tearing flesh. It had detected the family from a distance and was now closing in. Without warning, the water around Liam suddenly erupted. One moment he was laughing with his sister. The next he was yanked beneath the surface. A flash of silver and white moved through the water and a scream pierced the air. Megan, just a few feet away, froze in horror as the dark shape of the great white shark became clear. James leaped into the water, frantically swimming toward Liam, who had surfaced briefly, blood streaming from a deep wound in his leg. But before James could reach him, the shark struck again, its massive jaws clamping down on Liam's torso, pulling him under. The water turned red as the shark thrashed violently, shaking its prey with incredible force. Panic swept over the family. Sarah screamed from the boat, trying to grab Oliver, who had been about to jump into the water, while Megan swam back toward the ship in terror, desperately trying to escape the carnage unfolding around her. But the shark wasn't finished. It turned toward Megan in a flash, its black eyes locking onto her. Before she could pull herself back onto the boat, the shark lunged, its powerful jaws catching her by the waist. Megan let out a scream, her hand slipping from the boat's edge as the shark dragged her into the depths. The water around her churned violently, and her small body was no match for the predator's strength. Blood filled the water once again as James tried to reach his daughter. But it was too late. Sarah clung to Oliver, who was now sobbing uncontrollably. His birthday joy turned into unimaginable horror. She watched helplessly as her husband, desperate to save his children, swam toward the chaos. But the shark was relentless. It came back for James, its speed and power overwhelming. With a single, brutal strike, it grabbed him by the legs, pulling him under just as it had done to Liam. The water frothed as the shark twisted and tore at James, his struggles weakening until they stopped. Now only Sarah and Oliver remained. The boat rocked as the shark circled, its dorsal fins slicing through the water, searching for its next target. Sarah knew they had to escape the water, but she was afraid. Her heart raced as she held onto her son, praying for a miracle. But the shark wasn't done. In one final, devastating attack, the shark rammed the side of the boat, knocking Sarah and Oliver into the water. The force of the impact left them disoriented, and the shark struck before Sarah could regain her bearings. Its jaws closed around her midsection, pulling her down with brutal force. Now floating helplessly nearby, Oliver screamed for his mother, but the shark quickly turned its attention to him. In an instant it dragged him under, his small body disappearing beneath the bloodied sea. The Coast Guard, alerted by another nearby boat that had witnessed part of the attack, arrived minutes later. But by the time they reached the scene, the water was still. Only bits of debris and a red stain on the water remained as a silent testament to the unfolding carnage. They could do nothing when the Coast Guard pulled up to the wreckage. The shark had vanished, and the McAllisters were gone, devoured by the ocean's most fearsome predator. Only a few boat pieces remained, drifting aimlessly in the blood-streaked waters. The Gold Coast community was shocked and struggled to comprehend the tragedy. It was a reminder of the untamed power of the sea, where even a day of celebration could turn into a nightmare in a matter of moments. It was a warm, quiet morning on August 12, 2001 in Boca Palms, a small coastal town in Florida. The beaches were mostly empty at this hour, with the sun just beginning to rise. For Eric Taylor, a 33-year-old local, this was his favorite time to swim. The water was calm, the air cool, and he enjoyed the peaceful solitude before the beach filled with people. Over the years, he had made this early morning dip a routine, often swimming alone in the shallow waters just off the coast. Eric parked his car and walked down the beach, feeling the sand between his toes as he headed toward the water. He wasn't a competitive swimmer, but strong and confident in the ocean. He had grown up by the beach, and the sea was like a second home. He waded into the water, sighing as the coolness refreshed him from the heat. There was no wind, no signs of danger, just the endless stretch of water inviting him farther out. Florida's waters were home to many sharks, though attacks were rare. Lemon sharks frequented these waters and were usually non-aggressive and avoided human contact. But they were also territorial. Lemon sharks were often hunted in the shallow waters where Eric was now swimming. Though they were not typically a threat, their powerful jaws could cause serious harm if provoked or threatened. As Eric swam out farther, unaware of the potential danger, he focused on his strokes, gliding smoothly through the water. He had the whole ocean to himself, or so he thought. The lemon shark lurking nearby, invisible beneath the surface, wasn't initially interested in attacking. It was simply moving through its territory, keeping to itself. But the swimmer's presence had caught its attention. Sharks, like many creatures of the sea, react based on instinct, and in this moment, the shark saw Eric as a possible threat to its space. The morning sun reflected on the water as Eric turned onto his back, floating momentarily to enjoy the stillness. His eyes closed, lost in the rhythm of the ocean's movement. He felt safe, unaware that the lemon shark was getting closer just below him, circling slowly, its dark silhouette blending with the sea floor. The sudden force hit Eric before he could even process what was happening. A sharp pain shot through his right leg as something latched onto him with crushing force. His body stiffened, and his instincts kicked in. This was no wave or cramp. It was something alive, powerful, and dangerous. As he twisted in the water, Eric saw the large, unmistakable shape of a lemon shark, its teeth buried deep into his leg. The pain was unbearable, a burning sensation as the shark's jaws tightened. Eric's scream through the ocean's vastness swallowed the sound. He flailed in the water, trying to break free, but the shark wasn't letting go. Its grip was firm, dragging him under as it thrashed, its powerful body moving with terrifying speed. Desperation took over as Eric punched and kicked at the shark with everything he had. His fists slammed into the shark's snout, a spot he knew could be sensitive. And for a brief second, the shark released him. Blood filled the water around him, and Eric's vision blurred as he tried to swim away, his legs searing with pain. But before he could get far, the shark returned, its predatory instincts kicking in as it closed in for another attack. The shark's teeth grazed his thigh this time, slicing through flesh but not clamping down as hard. Eric kicked out again, his foot connecting with the shark's side, pushing it away just enough to give him a chance to escape. His arms and legs moved frantically, pulling him toward the shore, the taste of salt water and blood heavy in his mouth. He could see the beach now, but it seemed impossibly far as the panic and pain coursed through his body. On the beach, a few early risers had noticed the commotion. A woman walking her dog had seen the splashing and the unusual movements in the water. Realizing something was wrong, she began shouting for help. Another man, a jogger, sprinted toward the water, knowing that whoever was out there didn't have much time. Eric's strength was fading fast. His leg felt on fire, and every stroke was a battle to keep himself afloat. He glanced back, fearing the shark would come for him again, but for now, it had disappeared into the depths. He didn't know if it would return, but he had no time to think about it. His only focus was on reaching the shore. When Eric finally felt the sand beneath his hands, he collapsed onto the beach, gasping for air. His leg was mangled, blood pouring from the deep gashes where the shark had bitten him. The jogger and the woman rushed to his side, frantically calling for an ambulance. Eric's body trembled as the shock began to set in, his mind racing as he replayed the attack in his head, trying to make sense of it. As the beach filled with onlookers, many stood in stunned silence, staring at the blood-streaked water where the shark had attacked. They couldn't believe what had just happened. For Eric, the physical pain was overwhelming, but the mental scars would last far longer. The ocean, once a place of peace for him, had become a nightmare in seconds. Eric survived the attack, but his leg would never fully heal, the bite leaving deep scars both on his skin and in his memory. He would later tell the story of that day, describing the terror he felt as the shark dragged him under and his helplessness in the face of such a powerful predator. The waters of Boca Palms remained beautiful, but for Eric, they always reminded him of how quickly nature could turn on you. He never swam alone again. It was June 7, 1996, a day that had started with bright skies and calm seas off the Bahamas coast. It was supposed to be a routine trip for Robert Darnell and his crew. Robert, 46, an experienced sailor, had set out with his brother Daniel and their two friends, Jack Monroe and Steve Callahan, on a week-long sailing adventure. They had planned to explore the remote islands in the Caribbean, taking in the beauty of the ocean. Their boat, the Sun Chaser, had been sturdy enough for the journey, or so they thought. The first few days went smoothly, the men bonding over shared stories, fishing, and enjoying the calm, open waters. They had been friends for years, often taking trips like this together to escape their daily routines. The boat had all the needed supplies, and they felt confident navigating through these waters. But the weather turned without warning. A sudden violent storm hit them late afternoon, far from any coastline. Dark clouds gathered quickly, the wind howled, and the waves grew large, brutally crashing against the boat. The crew scrambled to control the sails, but the storm was relentless. The Sun Chaser was tossed around like a toy in the angry sea, and within hours their worst fear came true. The boat capsized. Water poured into the cabin, and the men barely had time to grab a life raft and some emergency supplies before the boat sank beneath the surface. The storm raged on, but they had no choice but to climb into the small inflatable raft and hold on. Their boat was gone, leaving them adrift in the open ocean, and they did not know how long it would be until they were rescued. The sea calmed as the storm finally passed, but they faced a new challenge. They were stranded miles from shore, with no food or water except for a small amount in their emergency kit. The scorching sun beat down on them, and dehydration set in quickly. The vastness of the ocean around them was both beautiful and terrifying. No sign of land or any ships could come to their rescue. For the first day, they remained hopeful. They rationed their water, keeping their spirits up as best they could. But as the hours dragged on, the reality of their situation became clear. They were alone, floating in the endless blue, and their chances of survival grew slimmer with each passing moment. Then, on the second day, they noticed the fins. Oceanic white-tip sharks, known for their curiosity and aggressiveness, were common in these waters. Unlike many sharks, which typically avoid humans, the oceanic whitetip was known to be bold, especially when hungry. These sharks were opportunistic predators, and shipwreck survivors had often reported encounters with them. For Robert and his crew, the sight of the fins cutting through the water sent a chill through their already exhausted bodies. At first, the sharks simply circled the raft from a distance, watching the men with dark, unblinking eyes. There were 3 of them, their large bodies gliding effortlessly through the water. The sailors tried to remain calm, knowing that panicking would only worsen things. But as the hours passed, the sharks grew bolder, swimming closer to the raft, their fins cutting through the water rapidly. By the 3rd day, the sharks were no longer just circling. They began bumping the raft, testing its strength, their powerful bodies pushing against the small, inflatable craft. Robert and the others could feel the impacts each time a shark made contact, their hearts pounding as they realized how fragile their situation had become. The sharks were hungry, and their patience was wearing thin. The men tried to scare the sharks away by banging on the raft's sides with their makeshift paddles, but the predators were relentless. The smell of the men, weak and sweating under the heat, had drawn them in, and the sharks wouldn't leave without a fight. The crew knew they had to act fast. They fashioned crude weapons out of pieces of metal they had managed to salvage from the boat's wreckage, sharpening the ends as best they could. The first attack came just after noon. One of the sharks, larger than the others, launched at the raft, its powerful jaws clamping down on the side. The men screamed in horror as the shark's teeth tore into the rubber, puncturing the raft and sending water splashing into the boat. Robert grabbed one of their makeshift weapons and stabbed at the shark's head, striking it several times before it let go. Blood filled the water, but it wasn't enough to kill the shark, only to anger it. The shark thrashed wildly in the water, and the other 2 sharks began circling faster, sensing the chaos. Jack was the next to strike, jabbing at one of the approaching sharks as it came too close, its fin brushing against the side of the raft. The men were exhausted, their arms heavy, but adrenaline kept them going. They fought with everything they had, knowing one more breach could sink them, but the sharks were relentless. As the sun began to set, the men knew they couldn't keep this up much longer. Their raft was slowly taking on water, and the sharks showed no signs of retreating. Desperation set in as they realized that night was falling, and their chances of survival would be even lower in the dark. Suddenly, one of the sharks lunged again, aiming for Steve, who had been leaning too far over the raft's edge. The shark's massive jaws clamped down on his leg, terrifyingly pulling him into the water. Steve screamed, thrashing in the water as the shark tore into him, his blood mixing with the ocean as the other sharks moved in for the kill. Robert and Daniel tried to pull him back into the raft, but it was too late. The sharks were too fast, too strong. Steve's body disappeared beneath the surface, and the water around them turned red. The remaining 3 men watched in horror, their minds barely able to process what had just happened. The sharks continued to circle, but now the men knew they were next. The ocean had become a battleground, and they were losing. They fought off the sharks as best they could, but exhaustion and fear had taken their toll. With night approaching, they knew they wouldn't last much longer. When the Coast Guard finally found them, the raft was barely afloat. Robert, Daniel, and Jack were pulled from the water, weak and delirious, their bodies covered in wounds from the sharks' relentless attacks. Steve was never found. The ocean had claimed him, and the sharks had left only a bloody memory behind. The sailors would live to tell their story, but the scars, both physical and emotional, would remain with them forever. The ocean, once their playground, had turned into a nightmare, and the sight of a fin cutting through the water would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The waters off Durban, South Africa coast had always been a favorite spot for seasoned spearfisher Paul Mitchell. On March 18, 2003, Paul, a 35-year-old with over a decade of spearfishing experience, was preparing for what he expected to be a successful day in the ocean. The South African coastline, known for its rich marine life, was home to an array of fish species and, as every diver knew, some of the ocean's largest predators. But Paul was confident, skilled, and had faced his share of close encounters. That day, he was accompanied by his longtime friend and fellow spearfisher, Greg Ellis. The two had been diving together for years, relying on each other for safety in deeper waters. Paul was the more experienced of the two. But Greg had learned quickly, becoming a strong partner on these trips. Their plan for the day was simple: dive deep, target larger fish, and return with a solid catch before the afternoon heat kicked in. The sun was already rising when they reached their favorite dive spot. The water was clear, with perfect visibility and mild currents. They geared up, adjusted their weight belts, checked their spears, and descended into the water. Paul led the way, his body moving effortlessly through the depths, the spear gun ready. His heart raced with the familiar thrill of the dive, and his mind focused on the task. Paul had chosen this spot because it was known for its rich population of game fish, particularly yellowfin tuna. The deeper waters here could be challenging, but they had always yielded good results, and today they seemed the same. As they descended, fish darted in and out of view, their bodies reflecting the light filtering through the water. After a few minutes of scouting, Paul spotted his target, a large tuna hovering just above the seabed. He signaled to Greg to stay back as he slowly raised his spear gun. The shot was perfect. The spear pierced the fish cleanly, and Paul felt the familiar tug as the fish tried to escape. Blood immediately spilled into the water, spreading quickly as Paul began pulling the catch toward him. His adrenaline spiked, the satisfaction of the perfect shot filling him with confidence. But beneath the surface, the ocean's predators were already responding to the scent of blood. Durban's waters were home to various shark species, and tiger sharks were among the most feared. Known for their size, strength, and aggression, tiger sharks were opportunistic hunters, attracted by movement and the scent of blood in the water. Paul had always respected the dangers of these waters, but today, the reality of the threat was about to become far more personal. As Paul wrestled with the tuna, he didn't notice the dark shape gliding silently through the water. The tiger shark had been lurking nearby, drawn by the blood cloud from Paul's recent kill. Its senses were finely tuned, detecting the slightest disturbance. And now, it was closing in. Paul felt a shift in the water before he saw the shark. A powerful current surged past him, and he instinctively looked around, his heart skipping a beat as his eyes locked onto the unmistakable silhouette of a tiger shark. It was massive, easily over 12 feet long and heading straight for him. Panic gripped him momentarily, but his years of training kicked in. He knew exactly what to do. He released the line from his spear gun, letting the tuna drift away as a distraction. But the shark wasn't interested in the fish. It was focused on Paul, sensing both the blood and the movements of a new target. Paul's hand tightened around his spear as he began his ascent, kicking hard toward the surface, but he could feel the shark getting closer, its massive body slicing through the water with terrifying speed. Paul's mind raced. He knew the tiger shark was not a creature that would scare off easily. It was known for its persistence, especially once it had locked onto prey. He turned to face the shark, holding the spear gun out in front of him as a makeshift shield. The shark came in fast, its wide mouth lined with rows of sharp teeth visible as it closed the distance. With a sudden jolt, the shark struck. Its powerful head slammed into Paul, knocking him backward. The force of the impact sent him spiraling through the water, but he managed to keep hold of his spear gun. He kicked out, trying to distance himself, but the shark was relentless. It circled back, faster now, its eyes locked onto him as it prepared for another strike. Paul knew he had to act quickly. He aimed the spear gun at the shark's head, waiting for the right moment. As the shark lunged again, he fired. The spear struck just below its eye, not deep enough to kill, but enough to startle it. The shark thrashed, violently shaking its massive head. The spear lodged in its tough skin. Blood mixed with the water as the shark pulled back, disoriented for a moment. Paul didn't wait to see if the shot had done any lasting damage. He kicked upward with everything he had, his lungs burning as he raced toward the surface. The shark, though injured, wasn't giving up. It circled beneath him, slower now, but still dangerous. Paul could feel the water moving as the shark swam below him, and he knew it was only a matter of time before it attacked again. Greg was already there as he broke the surface, gasping for air, pulling him toward the boat. Paul scrambled aboard, his body shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. They watched in horror as the shark's dorsal fin broke the surface, circling the boat for several more minutes before disappearing into the depths. Paul collapsed onto the deck, his breathing heavy, his heart racing. The close encounter had shaken him to his core. In all his years of spearfishing, he had never come face to face with such danger. The tiger shark had been relentless, and Paul knew he had been lucky to escape with his life. It was July 22, 2005, and the waters off the coast of Nassau, Bahamas, sparkled under the late morning sun. A group of eager tourists had signed up for a snorkeling trip, one of the highlights of any visit to the Bahamas, and the day had started perfectly. The tour group, led by 2 local guides, set out from a small marina on a Coral Dream boat bound for a popular snorkeling spot, known for its crystal-clear waters and abundant marine life. Among the tourists was 29-year-old David Carson, who was visiting from the U.S. with his fiancée, Emma Ward, to celebrate their engagement. It was supposed to be a day filled with beautiful memories. David was particularly excited. He had always been fascinated by the ocean, and the Bahamas was the perfect place to see some of its beauty up close. The couple had been looking forward to this trip for months, and everything about the day felt right. The guides had briefed the group on snorkeling safety, instructing them to stay together and avoid wandering too far from the boat. Bull sharks were known to frequent these waters, and while the chances of an attack were low, the guides emphasized the importance of sticking to the group. Bull sharks, notorious for their aggressive nature and ability to thrive in salt and fresh water, were often spotted around the Bahamas. Unlike other sharks, they could be unpredictable and were responsible for more attacks on humans than any other species. Their stocky build, powerful jaws, and strong swimming abilities made them particularly dangerous, especially when provoked or when food was scarce. As the boat anchored near a reef, the group eagerly jumped into the water, their snorkels and fins ready for the adventure. David and Emma were among the first to dive in, marveling at the bright coral and colorful fish that swarmed below. It felt surreal. Everything was peaceful, the ocean calm, and the group spread out around the reef, enjoying the underwater scenery. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. The group stayed relatively close, with the guides watching from the boat. But David, lost in the reef's beauty and unaware of the increasing distance between him and the others, had unknowingly drifted away. Engrossed in watching a school of fish, Emma hadn't noticed David's slow separation from the group either. David continued exploring farther from the boat's safety and out of sight of the guides. His breathing through the snorkel was steady as he glided over the reef, unaware of the danger lurking nearby. The dark shape of a bull shark appeared below him, just beyond his line of sight. It had picked up on David's movements, drawn by his splashing and the unfamiliar presence in its territory. The shark began circling from a distance, watching David swam farther from the group, completely oblivious that he was being stalked. It happened in an instant. As David adjusted his mask, unaware of the predator below, the bull shark surged forward, propelled by its powerful tail. In the blink of an eye, the massive shark was upon him. David felt a sudden, sharp pain in his right arm, and his body went rigid with shock. Looking down, he saw the terrifying sight of the bull shark's jaws clamped around his arm, its rows of razor-sharp teeth slicing through skin and muscle easily. Panic took over. David thrashed in the water, desperately trying to free himself, but the shark's grip was too strong. It pulled him under, the force of its bite dragging him beneath the surface. His lungs burned as he struggled to get free, the salt water filling his mouth as he fought to hold on to his breath. Blood clouded the water around him, feeding the shark's aggression. Still unaware of what had happened, Emma finally noticed that David was missing from the group. She lifted her head out of the water, scanning for him, and saw the thrashing in the distance. Panic seized her as she realized something was wrong. She called out to the guides, who immediately sprang into action, racing to get the boat closer to where David was struggling. Meanwhile, David was losing strength. The shark had let go of his arm but began circling him again, preparing for another strike. David, desperate and in excruciating pain, kicked out wildly, his mind racing with fear. He knew that if the shark attacked again, he might not survive. His arm was bleeding heavily, the pain nearly unbearable, but the adrenaline coursing through his body kept him moving. As the shark circled back, David grabbed the only thing he had, his snorkel. It was a weak defense, but at that moment, it was all he could think of. The shark charged again, its mouth wide open, but David struck it on the snout with the snorkel as hard as he could. Surprised by the sudden hit, the shark recoiled slightly but wasn't deterred for long. It circled again, this time closer, its eyes locked onto its target. By this time, the boat had reached David. Armed with a long pole, one of the guides leaned over the edge, shouting for David to swim toward them. The other guide grabbed a rope, ready to pull David aboard as soon as he was close enough. David, barely able to see through the blood and salt water in his eyes, kicked with every last bit of energy, his arm numb from the blood loss. The shark relentlessly followed closely behind, its dorsal fin cutting through the water as it prepared to strike again. Just as it closed in, the guide jabbed the shark with the pole, driving it back long enough for David to reach the side of the boat. The other guide pulled him aboard in one swift motion, and the group watched in stunned silence as the bull shark swam in circles below, still searching for its prey. David collapsed onto the deck, his body shaking from the shock and the pain. His arm was torn, the deep gashes from the shark's teeth a grim reminder of how close he had come to losing his life. Wide-eyed and silent, the rest of the tourists gathered around as the guides raced to stop the bleeding and radioed for emergency help. David would survive, but the scars, both physical and mental, would stay with him forever. The Bahamas, once a place of beauty and adventure, had shown its darker side, and David knew he would never forget the terror of staring into the eyes of a bull shark. The day had started like any other for Simon Garrett, a professional diver with years of experience exploring the Great Barrier Reef. It was April 14, 2007, and Simon was alone, investigating a remote section of the reef known for its deep caves and narrow passages. The Great Barrier Reef, located off the northeastern coast of Australia, was one of the most breathtaking places Simon had ever dived. He had spent hours navigating its coral gardens and underwater tunnels, fascinated by the marine life that thrived there. On this particular day, Simon had chosen a new spot that he hadn't explored before. It was deeper, more isolated, and less frequented by tourists. The water was calm, and conditions were perfect for a long, quiet dive. Simon checked his gear, adjusted his mask, and descended into the blue. The familiar sensation of weightlessness took over as he swam downward. His air tank was full, and his dive computer showed plenty of time for exploration. He had always felt at peace in the water. The reef was like a second home to him, and Simon was confident in his abilities. His goal for the day was to explore a cave system hidden beneath layers of coral, rumored to be full of beautiful, untouched marine life. He ventured deeper, his flashlight cutting through the shadows as he entered the first tunnel. The coral walls shimmered, and schools of fish darted around him, making the cave come alive with movement. As Simon moved through the narrow passages, he took in the beauty of the place, losing track of time. Everything felt routine until he noticed something in the distance. A dark shape moved in the shadows ahead, just on the edge of his flashlight's beam. At first, Simon thought it might be a large fish or a stingray, but as he swam closer, he realized what it was. A reef shark resting in the narrow space, hidden among the coral. Reef sharks were common in the Great Barrier Reef. Unlike the more aggressive bull or tiger sharks, reef sharks were usually shy, often keeping their distance from divers. But they were also territorial, especially when disturbed in confined spaces like the cave Simon was now swimming through. Simon froze, his heart racing as the shark stirred, its sleek body shifting slightly in the tight space. The shark had been unaware of Simon's presence until now, but the disturbance was enough to set it on edge. The shark's movements became quicker, more erratic, and Simon knew he had to tread carefully. In the narrow confines of the cave, there was little room for error, and the shark now blocked the only exit. Simon's mind raced as he tried to stay calm. He knew sudden movements could provoke the shark. There was no way to swim around it in such a tight space. The shark turned slowly, its dark eyes fixed on Simon. It was a large one, at least 6 feet long, and its powerful body moved with grace, sending a wave of fear through him. Then, without warning, the shark charged. It moved with terrifying speed, its body slicing through the water toward Simon. He barely had time to react, pulling himself back against the cave wall, his heart pounding in his chest. The shark rushed past him so close he could feel the force of its movement. It didn't strike him, but its behavior was clear. It felt threatened, and Simon was trapped in its territory. The shark circled back, slower this time but still agitated. Simon's breathing became shallow as he tried to control his panic. His air supply was ticking down, and he knew he couldn't stay in the cave much longer. He had to find a way out before the shark attacked again. His spear gun, which he always carried for protection, was strapped to his side, but using it in such close quarters could provoke the shark further. Simon decided it was a last resort. The shark circled once more, its body gliding just inches from Simon as it passed. It was watching him, testing him, and Simon knew that any wrong move could trigger another charge. He slowly reached for his spear gun, keeping his movements as controlled as possible. The shark stopped circling, hovering before the exit, blocking his only way out. Simon's breathing became more rapid as the tension mounted. He was running out of options, and the shark wasn't moving. If he didn't act soon, he'd be out of the air with no clear escape. Taking a deep breath, Simon made his move. He pushed off the cave wall with a quick burst of energy, swimming toward the shark, hoping to spook it without forcing a confrontation. The shark reacted instantly, turning toward Simon with lightning speed, but instead of charging again, it darted away, its powerful body disappearing into the deeper water beyond the cave. Simon didn't waste a second. He swam as fast as he could toward the exit, his lungs burning as he kicked hard, pulling himself through the narrow opening. Once free from the cave, Simon ascended quickly, his chest tightening as his air supply dwindled. He broke the surface with a gasp, his body trembling from the adrenaline and the fear of what had just happened. The open water felt like a refuge, and he floated on his back momentarily, catching his breath and trying to process the terrifying encounter. Back on the boat, Simon sat quietly, replaying the event in his mind. He had come face to face with a reef shark in one of the most confined and dangerous situations imaginable, and lived to tell the tale. With all its beauty and wonder, the Great Barrier Reef also showed Simon how quickly things could go wrong. The ocean was a place he loved, but it was clear to him now that it held dangers he would never fully control.